All right, we'll open sign control board meeting at Kyle City Hall, 100 West Center Street. This is the, was it 12th of October? No, the 16th of October, 2023, 6:30 PM. We'll do a roll call of the board.
Palacios? Here. Lancaster?
Here.
Terry?
Here.
Vasquez?
Here.
Rodriguez?
Here.
Okay, we have full board established. We'll do a citizen comment period. Is there anybody signed up and registered for citizen comments? Okay, we'll close the citizen comment period, and we'll move on to the third item, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Did everyone get a chance to read and review the minutes of last meeting?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I'll entertain a motion to accept approval of the minutes.
I second.
Motion by the chair and seconded. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, minutes pass. All right, next item on the agenda is consider an act on a request by Joel Wood on behalf of Meritage Homes to request a variance to the City of Kyle sign owners, Chapter 29, Section 29-14D, to allow backlit channel letters on subdivision monument sign located at 345 Limestone Creek Way in Hays County, Texas. This time we'll open a public hearing. And there's no individuals requesting to speak in a public hearing. We'll move on to the action item. Close the public hearing. And does the city go first or the applicant? Okay, we'll let the applicant go ahead and step up. And please state your full name and make sure that I guess the microphone's turned.
Joel David Wood. Thanks for hearing, our case here. I guess I'd like to start by saying that the intent of what we're doing is to provide a product which is, meets the intent of the actual sign ordinance and exceeds it. We've placed the sign in the most reasonable place for our subdivision, and as we placed it, we ran into an issue with being in close proximity to residences. By providing backlit lighting on our sign, we're reducing some negative effects of lighting, which would be light trespass, glare, things that would affect motorists, things that would encroach on people's houses on both sides of the street. So we believe that we're improving the conditions in the area through backlit channel lighting. And we're also putting things together that would work towards dark sky principles, which are going into effect in a lot of places. So we think we're trying to get out ahead of the curve. But I think our main goal here was to meet and exceed the intent of the sign ordinance. There are other examples in the city which use backlit channel lighting, and I think they're meeting the intent or exceeding the intent in those cases as well.
Okay, so my one question is you mentioned that there was other areas of the city that have backlit channel lighting, and where would those locations be?
So I have 4 examples. The first one is Caseta, and that one is east of I-35 on Bunton Lane. There's a sign for Brooks Ranch subdivision that is west of I-35 on Highway 150. And Stagecoach Crossing, which is west of I-35 on Scott Street. Another one is Cypress Forest west of I-35 on Cypress Forest Drive.
Okay. All right, at this time, do you have any other comments that you'd like to make?
No, but I'd be willing to answer any questions. you
Okay,
have
we're going to
to.
let the city present their position, and then we'll go into some question and answer discussion.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Kayla Sharp, city planner for the record. So as you just heard, this is a variance request for Waterstone Crossing. So this is located off of East Post Road next to Quail Ridge, and it's set back approximately 900 feet east of the I-35 northbound frontage road. So the applicant is seeking a waiver from Chapter 29, Section 29-14D. This is kind of a big section, so I've highlighted for you the portion that we're specifically looking at. It's very clear here that it states the lighting shall be ground lights or lights attached to the top of the sign focused downward directly on the sign. So in this case, backlit letters are not permitted per the code. So yeah, just kind of a repeat of that. They are requesting backlit channel letters instead of the ground lights or down lighting. And then here are the exceptions. Again, all of these have to be met in order to grant an exception. I've also provided you with a list that includes staff findings as well as a checklist on the back. So when you're considering whether you're going to approve or deny, you can jot down some notes if you'd like to for your own findings. So this is the sign that they are proposing. This is kind of the daytime view. And then as you'll see the nighttime view on the left there, you can see the backlit letters. So there is that. And then here is the proposed location of the sign. It's on Limestone Creek Way at the intersection of Waterstone Boulevard. And so there's a closer up view of the location. And then if you look at this, so it's right at the corner of some townhomes, some single family, and then that purple piece is zoned for commercial use. And so it's close to residential, but not necessarily directly adjacent to it. And then staff analysis, staff has determined that the request does not meet the criteria to be granted a waiver. Section 29-14D is very clear in what type of lighting may be permitted. The requirement allows for reasonable use of the property. There are not any special conditions unique to this property, and the permitted lighting types would not alter the character or impair the use of adjacent properties. The hardship has also been self-created due to the design and height of the sign, and as such, staff cannot support this waiver request and does not recommend approval. I just want to make it clear that these are staff findings. And then if y'all choose to approve the request, you must include your findings in the motion. That's why I've provided that checklist to kind of help you work through that. So if we want to go back to that list of exceptions for y'all to review. I also just want to note, I know it was mentioned that there are some signs in the city that do not meet this requirement. We cannot base the decision for tonight based off of those. It is entirely separate from what you're considering here tonight.
Right.
Any questions?
So my one question is, because I did notice the references to other backlit signage, how did those signages for these other subdivisions come into play? Were they done through, special construction districts?
So there are some, and I don't know if any of the ones that were mentioned tonight were a part of development agreements. There are some development agreements within the city where I know at least going forward you might see some of this. But as for the ones in the past, there have been some that it was missed during permitting. And so it was simply missed or not understood by the past reviewers, that code section. But again, each sign, the goal is to make sure we are interpreting the code correctly and applying the code correctly. And staff, if we see something on a permit that's not code compliant, we can't approve it. So that's kind of where staff stands on that.
And what's the process for amending the ordinance? Does it just have to go be an amendment prepared and presented to the city council for approval?
Yes, I would have to look in the code. I don't believe that the board can recommend making an amendment to the code. But that is something that ultimately can be done, that staff can work on. But that doesn't
Right, I know,
fix
it doesn't
the issue at
apply.
hand tonight, yeah.
Right, I understand. And if we did recommend that staff, prepare that amendment, because I mean, I wrote the sign ordinance so many years ago, when the city was very, very small. We didn't have a lot of individuals there, and I don't see this really breaks the mechanism for what we intended when we wrote the code originally, of course, but that still falls back to the city council to have to make an amendment to approve this. So I was kind of curious as what kind of time frame that would entail to ask for an additional lighting requirement for signage.
I'm gonna rely on, we have one of our city attorneys here,
Hi.
to answer whether or not, I was reading through the code earlier today, and I don't believe the sign control board can request that amendments be made to the code.
Right.
So I don't think it's something that y'all can recommend, but it is something that staff can look into.
Okay,
But even then, the timeline, it just kind of depends on, Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, and also if we have approval from our city manager to move forward with that.
okay. All right, is any other board members like to post any questions?
Looking at it, and I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but the brightness seems to be different from what the code is. Am I just not looking at it the correct way, or because code, as I understand it, is there's lighting outside, and this looks like the lighting is on the inside.
That's correct. That's
Yes.
that's the reason for the request for variance. The
So,
backlit is not approved right now.
so is it brighter, or is there a difference in lumens or the brightness?
It just kind of depends, and generally with our current code, also something that we want to look at in the future with any amendments, if we're able to move in that direction. Our current code, when we're reviewing permits, doesn't take lumens into account or anything like that. So all I have to base my review on is the fact that it says no backlit letters, no internal illumination. So that's all I can look at when I review.
And I mean, when you were talking about that code that was written, I'm not sure, several years back, but it seems like it's changing. The times are changing and the signs are changing. So, I mean, to me, just to give you my thought, it looks like it's a real nice sign compared to the old type of code that you're enforcing on there.
Right. Again, some of the neighborhoods have made agreements with the city prior to development to allow for conditional use and development. So that's why some places may have those kinds of signs and others don't. And in this case, some places have not been.
Wait, that's
monitored.
what I was gonna ask was, I mean, when they requested for the sign, this was what they proposed originally, even though the code was, it's not allowed?
Correct.
Gotcha.
And that's how we ended up here tonight, was they submitted this sign permit and I denied it because of the lighting issue, and they still wanted to seek the variance, which they have the right to do. But staff believes that based on the criteria, because keep in mind it has to meet this entire list of criteria, It does not meet that in order to be granted an exception according to staff.
Right, and for that exception to be made at that level, it has to be the city council.
That's correct.
It's outside of our jurisdiction, even though, like, to amend it, like what Paul said.
If
Well,
we
to
could-
amend the code, it would have to go to city council. The decision tonight stops with y'all unless the applicant decides to
Right.
appeal or something.
But in order for us to do that, we have to answer 6 questions,
Right.
7 questions, and provide, an accurate
Documentation.
representation. I can already see a couple places where I just can't
Right,
make that adjustment.
sure.
That's why I was questioning whether or not we could, petition the city council to amend that or to look into the amendment process for that.
Well, Jason Lutz, Senior Planner. We can take your concerns to our city manager, run that by him. He has weekly meetings with city council. We can kind of see if that's something that they'd want to look at. Generally, though, sign codes, when you amend those, it tends to be kind of a full-scale redo of it, and we do know we have some issues with our code currently that we'd like to address. So at a minimum, we'd probably be looking a couple months just between proposing the amendment, getting it on council agenda, getting that scheduled. But if that's something you'd like, we can discuss that with our city manager, but that's not something we can push forward right now. We have a couple other zoning code amendments. We have our comp plan going on. So we've got some high priority projects that we're being tasked with. But we will definitely let him know that y'all are discussing that. If they decide to do that, then we can shoot y'all a quick email and let y'all know that that was approved to move forward. So.
Okay. I was just saying we might be able to fast track a one-line amendment into the code for, this specific purpose, just to
Yeah.
address the plaintiff's concern. 'Cause-
Sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead, your question?
It wasn't necessarily a question, but just adding on to that, more than likely, if you're talking about a one-line amendment, council's probably not gonna go for that at this point. They'd rather see, a full rewrite, essentially. And a lot of our developments coming up will probably have signs included in their entitlements. And this one just happened to not have it. And so that's kind of how we end up here with following the code.
I have a question. I see that the sign is fairly tall, 30 feet. Can you show again the maps of where the sign will be posted and the adjacent areas?
Yes.
Because I don't see it here in the initial document that I received. So that's okay. That's entering the
Yes.
subdivision.
So
And,
the main entrance would be, that road kind of cuts through the commercial tract and enters into the neighborhood. So the top left corner is townhomes, and then immediately to the right of where the sign is some more townhomes, and then the rest of the lots that you see platted out are single family.
Okay.
So, and then this one kind of shows a little bit better. It's tilted, so it's kind of tilted a little bit more towards that commercial than the residential. So, and then that's the zoning. So the orangey color is the townhomes, the really pale yellow is the single family, and the purple is the commercial.
So the R1T is a townhouse?
Yes.
And we are in the R1A?
No, so the sign would actually be kind of at the very corner of the R1T.
R1T. Okay. The purple is R.
It's
The-
not
the
on that,
commer-
it's not on that legend, it's community commercial, so it's smaller scale.
Commercial.
Commercial for like neighborhood goods and restaurants and things like that.
When the city is negotiated for these types of sign entitlements, what type of concessions do we typically make?
So this one didn't have that in their entitlements, but for other agreements, they're usually having some sort of planned unit development agreement combination. And we keep them as close to the sign code as possible, but with some minor changes.
I think most of the ones we've seen has been regarding either square footage or height or maybe number of signs. Those are the most recent ones that we've done. Again, each development is different. We get different asks for, we don't really have a standard that we've seen.
Okay, so this channel lighting issue then isn't something that we've seen frequently in the entitlements as a separate issue?
Not that we've seen. Like I said, I don't know that Kayla and I were here during any of the older DAs.
I'm specifically asking about kind of the stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, coming up, I don't think we've seen any requested. Most of the DAs that we see now are kind of in our mixed-use areas. And because of the zoning, they actually do allow the internally lit channel letters. So that's why you see a lot of those around when you go around town, because they're in mixed use. So the zoning kind of dictates the type of lighting that you see.
Yeah, so this is, the 29-14 is specifically for subdivision signs.
Right.
And clearly calls out the lighting types that are permitted. And part of that is because when the code was written, those were the kind of lights that were common and were a little bit less of a nuisance to the residents around them, as they were intended to be pointed directly at the sign.
I know at the time that the ordinance was written in, there was very specific directive from city council requiring a very limited use, and that's why the ordinance was written there. But I think, I don't see esoterically how it, impinges upon, the city or looks bad, but
What about light pollutions? Light pollution, if there is a reference to it?
I believe there is a slight reference to light pollution in the code, but again, for the purposes of my review, when I'm reviewing sign permits, it doesn't take into account like lumens or things like that I can review against. That's something that we'd probably like to update is light trespass and lumens and things like that, but the current code doesn't have that when I'm reviewing them.
the idea of signage where they extended out and pointed back toward the building was one of the things to kind of control light pollution. They didn't want to have lights broadcasting away from buildings or structures, into neighborhoods. I did that when I was in construction of my own facility. We had to make sure that the lights were either under canopy or, pointing back at the building. So we had, one time when we first constructed, we had large, gooseneck lights that pointed back at our canopy rather than pointing forward. And that's sort of how this ordinance was crafted, because that was the will of the city council at the time. So like I say, we haven't updated this in a long time, and it probably needs an update, but I just don't see that we have the ability to really move on doing that.
Well, is there an opportunity, I mean, this is probably out of scope, so I'm kind of curious, is there an opportunity for the developer to come back in and renegotiate any of these issues with the city to make additional concessions to get
I mean,
this particular
they,
issue
from a
addressed?
city standpoint, they could potentially request like a master sign plan for the development. But that would go straight to city council. It wouldn't come to y'all. But that's,
There is another path, though, at least in theory, other than amending the ordinance.
it would probably take just about as long at this point with getting it on a council agenda.
Yeah, but, I'm not even convinced we could do the ordinance in 2 months, because these are popular legislations right now. So if we're gonna get slapped by something at the state level, then why bother to try to solve it at the local level?
It would
I'd
probably
wanna
be several
deconflict that
months.
issue first to make sure we're not gonna be in direct conflict with something that's coming down the pipe from the state of Texas, or even the federal level.
Yeah, I would concur that this probably wouldn't be, I know it sounds like a simple change to allow the internally lit, backlit letters. But at that point, we'd probably have to have some serious discussion on those lumens, nits. Are we gonna measure in lumens? Are we gonna measure in nits? Does PD have the ability to measure those? Do we have the proper light meters on staff? Is it a budget amendment? What are those calculations? I mean, that can take a little bit of time to do some research, provide some opportunities. But as Kayla said, there's a possibility for a sign package to be approved by council. Again, we can, go over this with our city manager, let him know that, that's, kind of the request from y'all is about looking at it. And then if he directs us to make those changes, then that's something we can do. At that point, we'd probably bring y'all into it to have a discussion on what are your concerns or thoughts on it, since you are the ones that actively hear those cases, as opposed to going to P and Z or another group.
Any further questions?
Yeah, the development to the right, to the east and to the west, are they already there, those townhouses?
To the west, so to the left, the kind of brownish color, that's already there. That's the Quail Ridge subdivision.
Okay,
And then the gray is technically not in city limits, but it has a non-annexation development agreement, meaning that someday when it does develop, it will have to be annexed into the city in order to develop.
okay.
And then I-35 is on the left side, that large up, down, that's 35.
Okay.
And this is just in the southern section of the city. Great.
Yeah, you have County Road 158 kind of up at the kind of top right there, if that kind of gives you a better idea of where it's at.
Thank you.
Joel, did you want to address any of these other
I
things?
just wanted to answer a couple of questions. I think Mr. Rodriguez had asked about the light pollution and what, I have a couple exhibits here that kind of show what both the standard in the city generally looks like versus what backlighting looks like.
Okay.
So this is backlighting. There you go. And then this second exhibit would be uplighting. Examples of uplighting.
I guess the uplighting is the one that they were trying to avoid. It pollutes more.
We'll need a copy of those for our records as well.
And you had a question about, I think, the backlighting, what that looks like. Well, it's fully shielded on the front and sides, and really the light is only projected onto the back support surface. So it's very contained in terms of light pollution, light trespass. You really only see a small margin around the letters, so you don't get that direct lighting, which I think the code is trying to avoid, from lights that might get adjusted over time as they're in an open space, tilted a little bit, and could become troublesome for motorists or accidentally shine into a residence. Internal lighting, while it is internal to the area that is contained, it's not internal lighting in the sense that it's a piece of plexiglass with a light behind it, lighting that plexiglass or translucent surface. So I think there's a better opportunity to contain, there's a much better opportunity to contain light pollution here. And while I believe this is fully dark skies compliant as well. And that was the intent of this type of lighting.
Any other questions for Joel?
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. All right, I'm gonna make a motion. Joel, I think the board as a whole is very sympathetic to your position. and your request, but I don't believe it's in our purview to be able to amend or grant a variance based on this. So I make a motion to deny with strong encouragement to staff to prepare a message for the city manager that, you know, we would like to see this move forward in a positive direction. And I think it's aesthetically pleasing. And again, I don't think when we were discussing the types of light pollution that we were looking at the time when we were crafting the ordinance, that this would have been compliant. And if it was something that was on the radar at the time, we would probably have said, entered it into the ordinance itself.
A second?
I have a motion and a second to deny the request. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion to deny is passed. Again, Joe, I apologize that we couldn't act on your behalf in this instance. It's just not within the boundaries of the board to be able to set a variance for this. All right, there being no other further items on the agenda, we close our meeting, and it is 7:01.